Greetings, I'm Mark, and if you've been watching, as you know by now, I love coding. Now, we left off going over some new things that Processing 4 can do, and as promised in this tutorial, this video, we are going to work with buttons. And I'm going to recap really quickly the kind of buttons in general that we're going to work with. One is one you're most familiar with, like I said before, a light switch, which is what they call a latching button. It's more or less like a button that you push in and it stays in until you push it again and it comes out, just like a light switch. Push it down, stays down until you push it back up. A latch type button. And then there's a momentary type button where you push it in, let your finger up, and it comes up. It either turns something on while the button's in, or it turns something off while the button's in, and when you let it up, it does the opposite. That's what we're going to work with. Now, and how we're going to do that is with, we're going to set up a class. And as I defined before, if you're familiar with classes, which several programming languages do use, a class is like a template. And within the template, you have a constructor, which actually takes data that you send to it and creates whatever it is you're trying to create, whether it's a database for automobiles where you have a general thing with the type of a car, the model, the make, the year, the color. All these can be a part of a template. And classes are great for making particles and things that you're going to have a lot of on the screen. And even if it's just two things that are going to be more or less identical, you can still use a class to create it. It allows you more or less to write the code one time as opposed to multiple times for each object, say a bouncing ball or buttons. And so what we want to do to create our class, it is going to be a little complex and it's going to take a moment or two to do it. So I'm not going to say it because I looked it up what a do means, and a do basically means is useless banter, useless chatter. And a lot of people say that in their video, without further ado. Well, I don't think anything that I was saying was useless banter, but you might think so. But anyway, so we're going to move forward, and we're going to start out with our class. To do what we're going to do, we are going to do a lot of refactoring of this original sketch that we created. And as usual, the first thing we want to do is save it. Now this time I'm going to save as, instead of part 5, we're going to call it part 5B for button. B is for button. Okay. Now, to create a class, well, the first thing you want to do is create another tab, and we're going to name that tab button, B-U-T-T-O-N, button. And to create a class, you're going to use capital letter, and we're going to again call it button, B-U-T-T-O-N, button. And then we're going to put some squiggly brackets and another squiggly bracket, and of course you cannot forget to call it class. And so everything in here. Now, what makes a button? Well, any object, it's basically going to have 4 more or less parameters that you got to start with. And 4 more or less parameters you got to start with. One of them is the height, then the other a width, and again X location and Y location. And so we are going to create those little, what we're going to use in those cases, integers, because all those are whole numbers. Okay, and so we're going to say for the sake of brevity, we're going to just use but instead of button. But W for width. And then we're going to do the same but H for height. And then we're going to do but X for X location, and but Y for Y location. That is the beginning. A button has a size and it has a location. Now, when you create a button, you kind of want some kind of action to happen to it. Some folks make them when you push them. Well, I've got a visual aid. Let me bring it up. Old software here. Does this make any sense to you? Okay, what you're seeing here, let's call this a processing sketch window. And the default upper left corner is location X0 and Y0. Here's a button. Let me highlight one of our first buttons because this is going to be fun. Okay, see this button here that I created. We're not going to use this technique, but you can. And what I did here, and I will show you, is I created a drop shadow, and I created two images for a button. So you can, when you click your button, you can basically get a result. As you saw, it dropped a little slower, like it's up now, smaller. It's up against the surface. You push it again, and it's back up. So that's one button. The other button that what I am going to use in this situation is I'm going to use a button that is essentially white and in gray tones. And what you can do with an image in those cases is add a tint to it. So when you click it, you can get many different colors that you can work out. That's the direction I'm headed. But under the same guise, you can do this same button over here. And I encourage you to try and do this, because you can, it's just one extra image for each button to have a little drop shadow and make it look like it's actually being pressed. And you can also change the color at the same time. And what this here is what you're seeing up on the screen, this basically if statement. This top one here is used for buttons that are rectangular, which this basically is, or square. And what it does in this situation is it looks at the well, let me show you real quick here. We will select this button. I believe this is the button. Yes. We'll select it, and we're going to move it to a location. Now, in general, what happens in processing, its default is for any object, image, a built-in geometry like a square or rectangle, is the upper left corner, just like the default up here, upper left corner. But we can change that with a quick statement, which what we're going to do, we're going to do it in the beginning here. One of the things I also wanted to do, which I'm seeing, is see right here in the now playing, the name of the song. I've got it just a space for empty, but we can just make it a null statement. It's not going to affect it. Now here, how we have text align center. Now, I'm going to show you another way we're going to do this, but right now, for our image, which we're looking at right now, we're going to say image mode. And we're going to tell it image mode center. And what that does, let's go back over here, is it takes our default from the upper left and it actually moves it to the center. And so what we're seeing here in this more or less test statement, and what this statement is designed to do is test when you click on the screen anywhere, is it within this button? And we're saying the mouse X location, we're testing it, is it greater than the button location minus, which the button location is now in the center, minus button width divided by 2. That's half of our width divided by 2. And so is it greater than that? Which would mean that it's somewhere within this edge minus this location, this edge, it's somewhere within here and this way. And we add to that, if mouse X is less than the button X location plus button width divided by 2, that would put it out over here. So if it's less than that, that means it's within the button on the x-axis. And we do the exact same thing for the y-axis. I'm not going to go over it. Now for circles, you can do something a little different, and you can use this for bouncing balls the same, to test it the same way if it comes in collision with something. And we're doing the same thing instead of defining the width, we could have done it the same way, but we're using the radius instead, and which would be the center point, starting from the center of the button outward. We're just replacing it, the button width divided by 2 with, and button height divided by 2 with radius. I love visual aids. It can help. Sometimes they don't. They can make it more confusing. If you were confused by this, just comment below. We're going to be going over this a lot more. Okay, so now we've set our button to image mode center. So when I push my button, one of the things I want to have happen is I want it to change size, and I want it, the other thing is to change color. The first thing I want to deal with is changing the size, and I'm going to create a float variable, and we'll say BP for button pressed, and we're going to make that equal to 1 right now. And oops, 1, this is going to be a multiplier, and so we can basically apply this to a size of a button, and when we apply it, it will, when it's multiplied by 1, it'll remain the same. But say we want to multiply it by 0.8, it'll make it smaller, or 1.1, it'll make it bigger. Pretty simplistic. It's basically a switch, but later on in the coding you'll see why I'm doing it this way. The next thing, let's talk about another reason why we're building a class, is because we want to add not just an image for a button. What if you want to just use built-in geometry? And with the coding we're going to do, you should be able to do pretty much either an image or a circle, ellipse, or a rectangle, square, using the built-in geometry with processing 4. So here's what we're going to do. One of the first things we want to do is we want names. We want to be able to choose. How am I going to choose whether I'm using an image or a built-in processing rectangle or other geometry. Well, I'm going to create a string so we can physically name it. And we're going to call that button style, butt style. Yes, butt style. The other thing we want to do is maybe put a label on the button, which makes sense. And so we're just going to make another string variable called label. Label. Later on, we're going to define this. Now, if we're going to use an image, we need to use the function called pimage, built-in function pimage. Pimage. And we'll name that button. Yeah, we're going to use button a lot here. B-O-T-T-O-N. And now, whether it is built-in geometry or it is an image, we want to be able to change the color, and we want to define a color for it. And so what I'm going to do is make some variables for these colors. And when you're using colors, you have to define them as a color. And I'm going to call it RGB1, which would be the initial color that you see the button when you first start the sketch, and then RGB2. And then I want to define a universal variable, more or less, that can be used instead of writing several or reusing these particular variables. We can just assign it to this one variable. And we're going to call this variable BC for button color. Then I want to make another variable. This one we want to determine a couple of different things. We want to first determine what type of a button it is. And is it a momentary or is it a latch? What we're going to do is we are going to define a Boolean for this button, Boolean, and we're going to assign it, momentary. Now let's just assign it latch, L-A-T-C-H, and see if we can figure this out. Latch. And is it latch, true or false? If it's false, it's momentary. If that makes any sense. Okay, and then we want another variable. So when you push the button, right, we want to say something happened. We want a trigger. We want this to be triggered. And so we're going to call it trigger. And this is basically, we set this up for when we're testing to see if the button's been pressed. And if a certain button's been pressed, it's going to trigger it. Now, in doing this in a class, we can set up multiple buttons using these same variables. We will be using an array of buttons, and each time we call it up, it will know which button we're pushing and assign it automatically. If that makes sense, maybe not, but it will. And so once you create these basic variables for your button, this kind of pretty much defines it all. We've got size, we've got location, we've got color when the button's pushed, we've got a style of button, a label for it. If it's going to be an image, we also have the type of colors and whether or not it's a latch or momentary. And an example of that would be a latch would be, say, a pause button. You click it, it stays paused until you click it again, right? A momentary button would be something like when you hit the select button and you bring up the select your playlist screen. You don't have to push it again to shut it off. It just does it. Same with the play button. You hit play, it starts playing the next song. Again, it plays the next song. Those are momentaries. So right now, we're only going to be working with 2 momentaries, but later on in the next video, we're going to get 3 more in. So let's continue. Anyway, so once you define what makes up this button, now you have to construct it. And with that, we use something called a constructor. And to do that, again, we got to use capitals. And we're going to button. And this time, we're going to define our button. So what a constructor does is actually builds it, and it will receive some parameters to build it. And one of those parameters is going to be what we defined earlier, would be, it's going to be a string, and it's going to be the button type, or style rather. And we're going to just use underscore style here. And these variables is only particular within a constructor, and you cannot use these variables outside the constructor or outside the class. And so the way we're defining this, we can use these variables and call them up, and I'm going to show you how we're going to do that along the way. So we have a style, then we have the Boolean, which was the type, if you recall. And again, we're going to just say underscore type, and this is going to be either true or false. Is it a latch or is it a momentary? True or false. And then we want the label, which is also going to be a string, and we're going to use the underscore label. And then the next thing would be the location. Which would be, let me see, we're going to say, it's going to be an integer, and a bx for, I like to put this is a common coding practice. You don't need to put these underscores in here, but we do. Bx, and that would be button x location, and then we're doing another integer, underscore by location, and we're going to do the same thing with width and height, and they're all integers. Int underscore bw width, and int underscore bh height. And now we want, I didn't make it an integer. Excuse me, sorry about that. Okay, integer. And then we need the colors. We want to have the default color of the button, and then when the button is being pressed. And so we got to define this as color. And we're going to do underscore C for color 1, and comma, and let's make our screen a little bit wider again. I'm getting squeezed out, or rather squeezed out, and then again color underscore C2. And that is going to be how our button is built. Those are the parameters we need to fill to create our button. which we will do in our init tab. And so now, what are we going to do with these? Well, you can see these little underscores here saying, oh, these aren't being used yet. Well, we're going to start using them right now. Okay, and so as we defined earlier, we have a butt style. Butt style. I'm going to say that's equal to underscore style. See, so now we have a button type. And the button type, if you call, is a Boolean. And we've already defined our Boolean for being latch. And we want that equal to, let's default that. Well, let me tell you about Booleans and processing. We're just going to underscore this and say type. So whatever it's sent in. So a Boolean, when you define it, if you don't initialize it, it always defaults to false. But in this case, it's being defined by the parameters that are sent into it. Okay, and let's continue. Then we want our label to equal underscore label. Oops. And then we want our, let's work with our location, our BTTX, which we defined earlier up here, equals BX, underscore BX, and BUTTY, B underscore BY, and our BUTT width to be underscore BW, and our BUTT height equals underscore BH. Now that defines pretty much all the parameters, almost. The next thing would be the color. Now, as a default, what I'm going to do here is default everything, and I think you've seen me do this before. First off, button color equals RGB 1, which equals underscore color 1, which we defined up here. And then do the same thing for the secondary color, which would be RGB2 equals underscore C2 color 2. Now, this is the last time that we are going to use, and the only time that we're going to use these variables that we defined up here, right here. Now within this, we can use these throughout our code and addressing them in certain ways, which we will learn along the way. Now, we said that this button is going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 parameters. So we've got to create all these within our initialization. We haven't completed our button, what goes on within our button class, because there's a lot of things that are going to go on in this class. One of the things is it's going to check to see if it's been pushed, and the other thing is going to display what is going on. Okay, but before that, we have to actually define it. So we're going to do it right under here, and we're going to say that our button class we want it to be an array because we're going to use more than one, and we want to call it a name that we can access it by. And so we're going to create an easy name. We're just going to call but. And so anytime we want to access anything that happens, that any of these variables we set up, we're going to type in but dot in the name of the variable. And I'll show you that as we go along. And so back to initializing the buttons. So what we're going to do is come over here, and now we're going to initialize it, the button. And we're going to say but equals new, and we're going to capitalize button, which we're talking about our array of buttons. Now in here, we're going to only create two right now because we have a select button that we're going to create and the play the next song button. And so that's going to be two buttons. Now, we could have easily said 10 buttons. Oops, 10 buttons. And created 10 buttons. And how will we do that? We would use a loop. But we're not there yet. And so now we want to actually, one of the things we're going to do to initialize or to create our button is first define their colors. And to do that, we need a color variable. And to do that, we're going to define two color variables universally. And we don't have to do that, but the reason why I'm doing that is for brevity when you're typing. So color, basically want it to be, say, color 1, comma space, color 2. And those are the two states that are, silly person, two states that our button's going to be in. Color 1 is the default. Color 2 is when it's pressed. Okay, back over to here. Let's do a quick save because we've been doing a lot of changes. Quick save, and we're going to start. I'm going to do a little cutting and pasting once I get this first one set up. Color 1 equals color, color. And if you recall, when if you recall in previous videos when I talk about color, whenever you're defining a color, the default for processing is RGB, which is each one of these points, which is like RGB. This would be green, red position rather. This is the green position, which I want this button to be somewhat green. And then there is the blue position. And I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it, Control V, and I'm going to change this color to. And this again is our select button, and I just want it to flash, say, a brighter green. And so we're going to change this to the highest number. And again, like I was saying in previous videos, that when you're using colors, there is 3 parameters, red, green, blue, and they range from 0 to 255. The highest level, the brightest level is 255. When you get down to zeros, it's black. Okay, now we're going to define our first button. And our first button, it's an array, right? So we got to make it an array, but, and we're going to say the index, the first one in all arrays is 0. And we're going to set that one first. And it's going to be equal to a new button. New button. And here's our parameters. Remember, to create our button, we need 9 parameters. And so the first one, we're going to just call it image. And it's a string, if you recall. And so we can test to see, using a test, if this parameter, is it an image? Okay, and then we can say, is it a latch? No. Our first one is not a latch, F-A-L-S-E, because when we push it, it flashes and brings up the load screen for our playlist. So it is not a latch, so it's false. And the label for it, we're just going to call it select, S-E-L-E-C-T, select. And I think you might be seeing now clear why I did what I did. Now, our first parameter in location. So if our screen, say, screen width right now, for me it's 800, so I'm going to say R width, and I want to divide that, did I spell it right? Nope. R width, and I want to divide that by 8. And the result is 100. Now I can hard code this, but it is also very specific to what I defined early on in setup as to the actual screen size. But for ease, if you want to change this here, you don't want to have to go through and change everything else. And so for ease, we're going to still use this technique. Okay, and so that's the X location. Now the Y location. The Y location, and what I like to do in those situations, I want to make all the buttons that are going to be aligned in one row and label those rows and set that parameter as an X location. And to do that, we're going to create another variable. It's going to be an integer, and we're going to put it right up here. And we're going to just call this row location, or row location. And what we want to do for the row location is over in initialize. In initialize, we're going to set that location. Let's do that back up. Let's do it right here. And we're going to say row location, and we want that to be equal to let me think, because remember, all our titles, everything's going to change from what it was in the beginning. And so our row location, we've already said that it's an integer. But let's see how it reacts. Our row location is going to be R height. And we're going to divide that by an arbitrary number. Basically just a little bit down from the top of the screen. I kind of want the buttons to be in that location. Let's just see what happens when we type this. It's probably going to give us a little bit of a bump going, no, you can't do that. Oh, it didn't. Interesting. We might still get an error here because we are taking a floating decimal point and dividing it by an integer and having it equal to an integer. Now, in general, to do this, you actually can type in this, int. And so if it turns out to be a decimal number, we won't get an error. Okay, we might check that later and see what happens when we remove it. But anyway, so that is where we're going to put that on the X location. So we've got our Y location where this is going to be, and our X location. This would indicate that all our buttons are going to pretty much be in line and somewhere near the top of the screen. And so we're going to say row loc. That is our Y location. And then we want the size of the button. Now, the size of the button. So the size of the button, width-wise, how wide is this button going to be? We're just going to do, again, our width, got it right that time, divided by 6. So it's taking the width of the screen, dividing it by 6. Let's see more or less what that's going to come up with. Our screen is 800 wide, and divided by 6 equals this number. So that's what we're going to go with. Roughly 133 pixels across. And next would be the height. And we want to take R, H-E-I-G-H-T and divide that by, let's say 9. Divide by 9. So now we got our height. We've got width, height. Now we want what we defined up here, color 1, C1. And we want to also send color 2, C2. Ooh, and I like to put that space in there. And we want to, and that is our button. And our first button, we defined it, and we're sending it on over, and it gets constructed by the constructor that we created over in our button tab here. Next button. Oops. Next button. Let's save this. Control S. And I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy all this right here. We're going to change a few things. Copy it. And we're going to paste it. And then this time around, we want the button to kind of be a, I don't know, it can be any color that you want, using RGB values. I'm going to make this kind of in like the blue zone. Is that, yeah, blues zone. And then I'm just going to brighten it a little bit like we did the previous one on the green side. So when it's clicked, this button is going to be button 1, which this is actually going to be our play the next song button. And this button, just to show you how this is going to work, we're going to say that it's a rectangle. Now these words are really important, image and rect. That we're going to test for this spelling. And if you make an error and do not spell it right in our test, you'll never know. It won't work correctly, and it will not show an error either. So the next thing would be, we want to know what kind of a button it is. It's not a latch button, so we're going to make it false. And then what do we want to label it? We're going to label it next song. N-E-X-T song. We could just as easily just said next. In fact, let's just do that. Now, a location. So we're going to set up the X location, and we're just going to divide the width by 3. It's somewhere a third of the way the screen down. And we're going to use the same row location, and the size, the width, we're going to divide this by 8. If we're dividing our width, we defined our width as 800. We're dividing it by 8. It's going to make the button 100 pixels wide. And the height. I want to end up with about 50 pixels high. And so we're going to divide the height with this 600 divided by, I believe that would be 12. And so that creates the 2 buttons. Now, using this technique, we set up, we could, like, again, have endless numbers of buttons. And if we didn't want to have such complexity about them. We could probably make this all a little bit smaller, but for now I felt this makes it universally easy to use, not just in this particular sketch but in many others. And you can see how we're defining it and how it actually is usable in many others. And so that's basically it for our initialization of all our variables for our random music player, which is now going to have buttons. And what's the next thing to do? Well, we need to create a way to look at these buttons. We want to check to see if a button has been pressed, and to do that we're going to make a function, and we're going to make it within our button class, and we're going to call this function void because nothing's going to be turned, but update. So we're going to create a function that is going to check to see if the button's been clicked. We're going to call it button update, but update. And to do that, we're going to actually use some of what you saw earlier on in when I showed you this, the visual aid. We're going to use this top basic formula or test or algorithm, what you want to call it. Oops. And so, how are we going to do this? First off, we want to be able to call this up. How do you call it up? Well, we're going to call it up in our main draw loop. If you look over in our main draw loop, how we got it going on here is it starts up, and obviously we're going to have to change a lot of this. So in our main draw loop, what we're going to do here is we got to change a lot of names. Well, yeah, we're looking at this. Okay, so first thing we want to do, let's stay clear right now. We want to be able to check our button situation. Okay, and again, we're going to check for button update, but we're also going to be making a function to display the buttons as well. And so we're going to kind of create this for loop that will contain these results, or get us to these results. And we're going to use a for loop, like I said, and we're going to say int I, and if you recall, when you define a variable within a for loop, it remains within a for loop. So if I use, say, this I variable outside this for loop, it'll look at it as a completely different variable, and no matter what this I amounts to. And so we want to say, as long as I is less than the size of our array, and if you're familiar with the arrays which we used previous, we're going to check that array. And so I believe our array is but, and if it's greater than button length, and then we're going to increment it. And this is our loop. Now, if we had 10 buttons, it would loop 10 times. Right now we have 2 buttons, it's going to loop 2 times. And what it's going to do is it's going to go into this loop, and each time it goes into the loop, what it's going to do is it's going to check to see which button is pressed. First off, we have already created it, and so it's going to be butt but I, dot, wow, there it is, button update right here. And, you know, let's do this a little bit differently. Let's go back over here, and I'm going to make this, I'm just going to rename this to just update. I don't think there's any reason why we can't. Update, and then we're going to fill these in soon, but we want to make another one, another function for display. Okay, and again in our loop we're going to call that up too. Yep, I know, I saw it myself. Alright, that's our basic loop. Oops. Now it makes more sense. But I update, but I display. Okay, and so each time it goes through our draw loop, it's going to go through all these buttons. And what's going on here is when you call this, it knows that that specific button, when right now it would be button 0, index 0, the first button, and it's going to come up here and it's going to know everything that we did here. And each time we created button 0 over here, when we created button 0, it is all this data is particular to this index location, which is a button. So we need to change a lot of things that we had set up, like all this stuff. This doesn't need to be here. This to here, delete that. And we want, yes, all lists must be in the same folder location. And if you recall, this /n drops it down another line, and as the music on the list. And then we want to set an actual location to where it's at, which I think this is good. Then we want to again continue to this here's not going to work for us. Let me see. This is no longer useful, but what we can do here is so what this statement is saying is, if the file is not selected, just print this on the screen. And of course it's also printing our buttons on the screen, which until we choose a list, our second button is even going to be on the screen. There's no point to putting it there because there's nothing to play. So what we got going on here is yeah, if the file hasn't been selected yet, keep prompting us this until that button's pressed. But if it has been, then what we want it to do is tell us a little more information. And I think what I want it to have it do is say, I kind of want what we had done earlier. Wait, yeah. We want I would like it to, once we click the playlist, like we done previously, I want it to tell me how many songs are in that playlist. And so we're going to say song names dot length. Is it there? Yes, right here. Song names dot length. I want the song names dot length, and I want to add that to say that 10. Say it's 10 songs on the list. This is 10 songs, 10, and then we want to space 10 songs in and we want the name of the list that we've selected, and 10 songs in, let's call it list name. And I think it's going to error out because I don't think that we actually put that in there yet. And so we want to define a list name. And I'm going to again go over here to the universal variable area. And let me see, where is it? String. We got folder name. We've got file name. But we don't have is list name. Okay, now we want to add that to our now we've got to basically assign the name of the list to it, and we're going to do that over here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to just copy this. I think it's got most of the elements. Control copy, Control V, and this is a list name, right? The name of the list. And so what we want to do is we want just the name. We don't want the .text name of the file. Our previous one, I think this is playlist01.txt. We don't want the txt. So we have to basically remove that. And we want to create a variable. We want to create a variable that we assign to that dot. And we want that to be int, and we're going to just call it dot index. This is where the dot is at. But we got to find it. And so before we find it, we're just going to say that the dot is at 0 location. And then within here, just like we're looking for these the brackets to determine folder name, we're going to do a similar thing. We're going to just copy this. Control C to copy. Control V to paste. And this time we're looking for the dot. And we're going to just say, call it dot index, DOT. So it's going to look at each character in the file name. And when it finds the dot, it's going to set that index to dot index. And when we copy this over here, we don't need this. Our first is the file name, our substring, file name, and then we're going to look through it. And we're going to say file name index, which we've created over there. It's up to a point, and then we want to up to the dot index. All right, and so basically first it isolates the name. When you're going through the folders, you know, it's going to be like C:\\/ documents \. This removes all that and just finds the file name. And then once it finds the file name over here, within the file name, it finds where the dot is. And down here, we're truncating, first off, we're truncating only the file name from this point. And then we're truncating afterwards at where .txt is. And so this should kind of get us what we need in just a file name. And having that over here, we should see where we had our it's gone. Okay, so now you can see that this is correct. So it's going to say this many songs in and the name of the file without the dot, the suffix is what we would refer to that. And then the next thing we want, let's see, when we're playing, we want the, I guess we want the now playing part, right? What song is actually playing? And we want to, we're going to just change this. We're going to just take this out right here and delete that. Now playing, and we've got a location, more or less. We're going to change this because this would put it up kind of too high. We want it to be a little lower. When you divide the width by 2, it moves right to the middle of the screen. When you divide height by 2, again, it moves right to the middle of the screen. And we want this kind of somewhere in the middle of the screen. So I'm going to say 2 point, not exactly 2 point, that's 2.8, 2.7. Whatever. Okay, now here's our repaired part. This should all be fine here. This should all be fine here. Let me see. I think that that's basically about it for titles. We might have to adjust these as we test it out. Right now, I don't think, let's save it. Control S. We didn't set up our update. We didn't set up our display. So now that's the last thing we got to do right now to make this work, is to do the update and do the display. And so we're going to start with the update. And the first thing we're going to do, we're going to use, let me see, where is that in this? Now we're using this click. And what I was doing here is testing if we release the mouse. And so all the actions start when we release the mouse. We are no longer going to do this. We don't need this at all, in fact. And so for now, we're just gonna comment this out, just in case we need a piece of it or something. We're gonna comment that out. It's no longer necessary. And over in buttons, since we're dealing with the button itself, we're outside of the button class. Let me tighten this up a little bit. Outside this button class, we're going to create something else. Instead of mouse release function, we are going to use the mouse clicked function. Now, the mouse clicked function works like this. When you click it, it detects not just a click down, but when you release it. That is what a mouse clicked is. And so we're going to use that built-in function, void, M-O-U-S-E, and clicked. And you're seeing something that I'm going to do here. And all I'm going to do is create, I'm going to use a Boolean that says this mouse has been clicked. And I'm just going to call it MC, mouse clicked equals, we're going to call it true. And it's going to, you're going to see an error right here because it doesn't exist yet. So what I want to do is I'm going to create another Boolean variable. Since we already got them set up over here, we're going to go over in the top here over Booleans. We're just going to add this onto our little thingy here, our Boolean list, which we're going to call it mouse clicked, MC. And again, if you don't define a Boolean, its default is false. And so over here, when it is clicked, we're telling it that it's true. So each time through the loop, it's going through here, this loop. And when the mouse is clicked, it sets this to true. Now what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to test that. Is it true? Has mouse been clicked? MC. It's a Boolean. And so that's our first test. If it's not been clicked, then it's not even going to do anything beyond this. Now we're going to test if the mouse has been clicked in a certain location. And you're familiar with and. So these conditions that we're creating, anytime we use and, all these conditions has to exist for this to pass through. And so we are going to test, guess what? Instead of mouse X, going to be our mouse X. And we're going to use the same calculations that you saw earlier. Space. If mouse X is greater than BUTT button X, minus BUTT but width divided by 2. And then we're going to test that same R mouse location, X, and see if it's beyond the button on the other side. Is it less than, but X plus but W divided by 2. And so this is the other side of it. And obviously, we have to do the same for the Y. Let's just do that from here. And what we're going to do here, something you may know about, that you can drop down a line. That you can drop down a line and it'll still work, but we're going to change these variables to this should be Y, this is going to be Y, this is going to be height H, this is going to be Y, and this is going to be Y, and this is going to be H. Now, if these conditions exist, and all of them have to be true, I'm going to bring this back over here. It's kind of bothered me a little bit. All these conditions have to be true for this to take place. So the button has to be clicked. It's got to be within the button. First thing we want to do is set our button click false. And so once it's gone in here, we can click it to false. We no longer need it until it's clicked again. But what we are going to do is set our trigger. Now, I think I've showed you this shortcut. We can say if trigger is true, turn it to false. Or if trigger is false, turn it to true. But this statement will do that. It's kind of a shortcut. Let's see, oops, wrong button there. Trigger. So if trigger is true, it turns to false. If trigger is false, it turns it to true. And then we're going to test that. Now, if trigger is true, which means the button has been clicked, we want that button to change size. So what we're going to say is we're going to say button color equals our secondary button color, which was RGB2. And because we're working within a class, processing knows that we're talking about whatever button we're working with. If it's button 0, it knows these colors. If it's button number 1, it knows those colors because we defined them each time we set up, which we did over here in initialize area. It knows each button and it knows its color because it was sent to it from this loop. Okay, so now it says, okay, yeah, and then we want the button pressed. What happens to that? Button pressed. Well, if we want it to go bigger, we can make, remember it's a multiplier for the size of the button, we can make it, I want it to make it smaller, just to see. We can change this, but we're going to say it's equal to 0.8. Or how about, let's go 0.9. We can change it if we don't like it. Okay, and that's if trigger is true. But if trigger is false, we want to put an else statement. Else, if it's false, we want to do basically the same thing. We want to say that the button color is equal to RGB1, and we want to say the button that's pressed, the size is going to be, it should have said BS, right, instead of BP, BS, but yeah, we don't need any BS in our sketch. And so we're going to say BP equals 1. And that sets basically the size and the color. The size and the color of our button. When you're clicking buttons, sometimes it's nice to have just a little bit of a delay from the time you click it, just in case it might somehow, sometimes it seems like it picks up an echo, and it might seem like you clicked it again when you only clicked it one time. And so what I like to do is set up a timer for that. And in order to do that, let's do this down here. The timer, in order to do our timer, what I like to do is look at the milliseconds. And store them in a variable of the moments at that moment. Now these milliseconds are based on how many milliseconds have passed since the sketch has started. And again, what I'm going to do is, this is going to be an integer. I'm going to add that to our integer variable list up here. Let me see, where is that? Right here, our location. And and we're going to say it's milliseconds. That way we can test that. It's one of the things we want to test. Once we've once the button has been clicked, we want to check it. We want to see what that particular button does. What is it going to do? And in order to do that, I am going to create another function, and we're going to call it just check. This is the check function, and let's call it butt check. Butt check function, yeah. And what we want to do in this butt check function, I'm going to create another tab, and we're going to call it I'll just spell it out. Button check. And in that, we're going to create our check function. And so what's going on here is when it comes through here, oh, jeez, did I spell it incorrect? Yes, I did. Oh my goodness. B-U-T-T, butt check. All right. Now, when it comes to here, first off, it sets the time at which this button has been clicked in milliseconds, and it saves that in MS, but we can check that later. Then it goes and calls up our button check function. And so in this function, what this does is this function is going to tell us which button has actually been clicked. And in order to do that, I found the best way to do that in trying to do, I could just do if statements and check, but I found the best way was to use a switch statement. Basically, the switch statement looks at a certain condition which you define, and it decides which case of that condition that you set up is it going to perform an act on. And so in order to do that, I wanted to use the button index, which button was being clicked. Now, again, we're trying to make this so if you have 10 buttons or 2 buttons or even 1, this still will work. But how do we do that? Right now, there's no way to know which button has been sent through from our little loop here over to here to do our update, and then into our button check. Where is that? How is that? Okay, how do we figure that one out? Well, what I decided the best way to do that, so what we want to do is just send I over in a parameter, and it's going to come over into here, into button, and it's got to receive this parameter. And so we're going to say that this parameter is an integer, and we're going to call it underscore I. And so we receive this parameter. And then what we're going to do is take that parameter, underscore I, and we're going to send it over to the button check. And the button check receives the underscore I, and now we can set this, use it in our switch. You can see how that flowed, okay? And so the switch starts out like this. You say switch, and then we want to take our underscore I, which is the switch condition, and we're going to check it on each one. And so in our switch condition, we would use what they call a case. And if that equals our first index, which would be 0, then we want to do all that we're going to type next. This means we pushed our select button. And what happens when we push that select button? Well, it's going to also it's going to open up our select playlist window. But if music is playing, if something's happening, we want to take care of that that situation as well. So first we want to check for that. And so if here's our favorite tester thingy, song is not null, and song dot, let's see, is it up there? If I type I is playing, if it's playing, now is it redundant? for us to use both of these, I'd imagine that it's not. Let me see. If song is not equal to, oops, null. If song is null, it's not been assigned. And if it's playing, we want it to do what? We want it to close the song. Close. Close the song. And so that would be what's going on here. And then what we wanted to do is we want to reset things. We want, okay, if the song is playing, we want to close it. We want to reset some things. File selected. Yet equals started equals FALSE. And so that's, if it was playing before, it closes it, and then it sets all these things to false, which wouldn't matter if we hadn't started it either. If we haven't loaded our first file, it's already defaulted to false. And so in the case that it was playing and it had been selected, we're going to change these back to false. And then we want to reset the now playing. And we want that to be equal to our null, nothing. And we want to clear, this is, if these songs were playing, we want it to clear our songs played list. Which, if you recall, we created a songs played list to store all the songs that were already played. So it won't choose the same song while it's playing random songs. And then it wants to start from the beginning. Frame count equals -1. Oops, I hate when I do that. -1. And then I think we can select this. I'm going to copy it, and we're going to go over to here, and we're going to paste it. Do we want to change something? Let's just, oops, delete that. And so what we want to do, I think, is going to change this to say lists must be in the same folder as the music on the list. So let's just do this as well. Drop it down a line. Tap it on over. Again, you're allowed to do this in processing and a lot of other languages for that matter. And so this is going to call up our window that lets us choose our file, just like in previous, only this time we pushed a button. Now, we're at the end of our button 1 case, and so there's no further need to be checking for anything else. So we're going to just what we call break. And this is going to break out of this switch, and it's going to break out of here. It's going to leave our button check and continue on. Now, our next button, in this situation, we would call it, let me see, I'm kind of not liking this. Let's tab these over. Tab, 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 tab. Come back over here. Case 1. And if this index number comes in as 1, this is what we're going to do. Set our Boolean that says this thing is started. We've done this. And we're going to set it to true. Yes, it's started. And then we want to make sure that it has been selected. And so if file selected, yet if it's true, and that button, just remember, if the file's been selected yet and that button has been pushed, basically is the only way it's going to be able to do this. We want to load song. Go to the load song function, which we wrote over here. Load song function. And that is that. So that should actually play our song. And so now we've take care of the action of each switch that we have, or button that we have, that we're going to be using. So now, what's next? It's all about displaying. And so we're going to do that over in our display area. And now we want to do the same thing, more or less. We want that index number. We need that index number in this situation for further testing. We will use this index number, and the index number has to do with a few different things, but we're going to just send this I right on over like we did previous. And we're going to go over here into display, and we're going to tell it that we want to receive underscore I. We're going to receive that. And now we're going to kind of use it. So after the button's been pushed, we want to display it. And we want something to take place during that time. And instead of like I said, I wanted a little bit of a delay. And the delay is basically, so like when you push a momentary button, you kind of, if you don't put a delay in it, you won't even see that it pushed. It'll change color and size so quick you won't even know that that happened. And so this basically, why we put that little timer in there is to put that just little bit of delay, so when it does display, it's going to help us see it. And so what we want to do is create a little if statement. We might change this down the way, but and if any of you folks see there's a better way to do this, we can use a delay thing, but the delay kind of stops everything. And this, I wanted to keep going through a loop. Okay, so, and if you really want to know how fast these loops can happen, you can check out one of my earlier videos when I was doing a little, called it a CPU test, and shows you kind of how fast these loops can actually happen. So we're going to say if milliseconds, which is current time since we saved it, is greater than the previous one we saved, milliseconds, plus 250. Now a millisecond, 1,000 milliseconds equals a second. 250 milliseconds is a quarter second. And so if that has gone by, and it's not, remember, if you put this in front of a Boolean variable, it means not. So if it's not latch, right? If it's not latch, in other words, if latch is false, which means it's a momentary, then do this stuff. And what we want to do is we want to again set our button color equal to RGB1, and we want to set our button size or button push equal to the default, and then we want to make sure that whatever condition trigger was left in before, we want to reset it to false. Oops. Oops, dang. Golly. We want to set it to false. Now, we want to display buttons. And we're getting near the end of this, quite actually. Okay, so we want to first test what type of a button are we working with. What style? Is it an image? Is it a circle? Is it, what is it? What is the button style? And so, first off, we're going to test that. We already set that in there earlier on when we did our initialization, and our first button is an image and our second one is a rectangle. And so we're going to test those very things right now. So if BUTT style equals, and make sure you do not get a typo here. If you have to, double check it, because it will not pick up a typo. It just will say, oh, it's not equal to this, and continue on. And you'll be going, what the heck? Okay, if it's equal to image, we want this stuff to happen. And this is when we actually display our image. Now, depending upon what we send to it, right, we want to tint it that color. Because if you recall, oh, wait a minute, we haven't done that yet, have we? We want to tint set tint to the button color BC. And then we want to display that image. And we're going to type in image. And now, first thing is, what is the image? Well, the image is a, I think it's a button. and we want to display it at location BUTTX, comma, BUTTY, and the size is going to be BUTT width, and then we're going to use our multiplier here. You're wondering where it's going to come in? This is where it comes in. BP and BUTTH times BP. And that's going to display our button. And we want to set a text size. And we want to set that text size to our width, which is 800 divided by 32. So we're getting a size, a text size. And again, the reason why I'm doing it like this with dividing it by the width is if in the beginning you're experimenting and say you don't like your screen, your sketch screen size, your canvas size, whatever you want to call it, and you change it here, it'll automatically change everything else based on that. And so let me see, where are we at? We're over here. Okay. We want to write the label for this button. And in fact, we're going to have to put a label on all the buttons. But if we put it right here, fill. Now, we've talked about this in the past. We're going to put a color here, RGB. But if you use the grayscale, you can use one single number, 255, and that will make it white. And that's going to be the label, which we're going to say text. Oops. Label. And we're going to position it right smack dab in the middle of the button. But X, comma, but Y. And that should do it. Now, when you want a text in the middle of the button, you got to do a couple of different things. Well, we already started it right up here. We said text align center, but that centers it on the X, and what we're going to do is also center on the Y, and so we know it's aligned in it. The next thing we want to do, let me control save this. Now let's continue. We have one more button to deal with. So we said 2 buttons. We already checked for the image. Now we're going to do the same thing for the rectangle. If but style equals, oops, it's very important not to get a typo in this particular situation. And what we want to do is create a button. This button is actually going to use the geometry that is part of processing 4, and I might have mentioned these things before with you, but here we go. We're going to start out with a stroke color, 150. And then, if you recall what stroke weight means, it's when you tell stroke weight, when you first tell it a stroke, it means to draw a line around the perimeter of that particular geometry. In this case, it's rectangular. Stroke weight is how many pixels is it? And so we're going to start with, we're going to hard code this stroke weight to 2 pixels. And then we want to fill our button, our rectangle with a color, which is going to be the first display rectangle, which again was a BC, button color. And now we're going to draw our button. And same thing, but X, comma, but Y, comma, but width times our multiplier, which was button push BP, and our button height times our multiplier. And when we're done with that, we want to take out that stroke. We want to say no stroke. So any other geometry we might be rendering, if we don't want it, we're not going to have it there. Oh, wait. No, I don't want that there. I want to X that. I want to actually put that here, Control V, outside that loop, and say no stroke and no tint, no tint, depending upon what one we picked. And again, we want to tell it the size text we want, and we want to type in text, S-I-Z-E, size, our width, divided by 40, or 400. 40 divided by 40. Text size divided by 40. That should give us a text size of 20, right? Wait, let's make sure this is right. Update. Okay, display. Aha! And that's our issue. So let's find out where we messed up here. 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 And then tab this here, enter this here, and this right here, and Control save it. Now, let's see if we got it. Oh, no. One last thing I've forgotten, and that is we need to add the image for the button. And I'm going to call it this thing. Here's what I came up with. I just have a square button on the grayscale from and it says 600 by 600 pixels. You can make that smaller if you want. Like I said, any image more or less can be a button. And I'm going to just drag this on over and drop it in. And I see an error here. Button X, button Y. Image. Button. There's an issue. Okay, right here, we see we got an error right here that, go to the top, P image up, here's the issue right here, it's button. You probably all saw that and we're screaming, B image button. Now, we've set it up that way, we're checking the image, but what we haven't done is we haven't called up the image. We haven't loaded it, and we need to do that. Button, and we already equals LOAD load image, and we're going to give it the name. Now this looks in the default data directory, and again that was square button. Got to put it in parentheses or in quotes. Square BUTTON button. It's a JPEG. JPG. Let me see. Oops. And I think, let's save this. I think that's it. Control save. When we get through it, let's see. Is it going to error or not? We got an error. Null point exception error. One of my favorites. And we're going to find out why here in a second. I see where our error is. This is not correct here. And so what we got to do is cut that, paste it. Here's where the error lay. We want to if a file isn't selected yet, we want it to, let me get rid of this. And so I'm going to set the text size, width, divided by 25. This might be redundant. And then we want to set some text that says that, well, we want to say what we said over here. Down over here. I'm just going to copy it. In fact, Control copy. Back over here. Control paste. Oops. We want to do position. Width divided by 2. And our height divided by 3. Oop. And I think we've got it. Let's save it. And then let's try it again. Oh, now see this? This is a big deal right here. And we're gonna X out of here. And let me just show you that. You see the center of word here is the upper left corner of the box, the rectangle. We did not account for that in the very beginning. And so right here we can say rect mode, and you probably guessed it, center. And let's save that. Now we've got it so that button will line up correctly, putting rect mode center. And you can see it's here. But we don't need this here right now. We don't need next song right now. So we have to put a little check to make sure that we don't need it. It's not going to display it. So what we're going to do is we're going to test if the file elected yet is false, and I equals 0. Now what's this saying is, if the file has not been selected yet, and it's the first button, it's saying do this. Well, we want to make sure, and then we want to say or if the file is selected. Gee willies. And what this is doing, hopefully, is it's only gonna paint the one button. So if the file is not selected and it's 0, index 0, do this. If the file is selected, do this. If the file is, say, 1 and it's not selected, then don't do this. Which would mean don't update and don't check for the second button or any button put in after that. Now let's save it, Control S, and run it, and we should see only one button. Click on it, brings up our list, select our list, open it up. I don't like the lineup with that stuff. Does anything else work? Okay, we have one little issue that we don't like. Song length. And so what we want to do is kind of fix that. We'll just say it's in the wrong spot, as I put it in the same place as that. So let's go a little bit further, different right there. And again, we can play with this. That's what it's about. Let's see if we like it now. Playlist. I like that better. Everything seems to be working. Let's see, I'm kind of not digging on that visual thing, so let's make sure we got it right. So I don't like how high the wave is going, so I'm going to change its little area here to 10. that's taking up. It's going to be a little bit less. I didn't like it overlapping each other. Now save it. She'll save. And let's run it again. And click. And you can see our button pauses just enough so we can see it being clicked. And we do see it getting smaller when we do it. Yeah, it must be in the same folder as the music on the list. Try it again. Open. 7 songs in the list. Play next. This is the one. Okay. Just want to do one other thing. I want to put a stroke weight just to take a look at it. Right here it's at 2, right? 2 pixels. We want to copy it. Let's put it right here. Paste it and change it to 1 pixel and see what we get. I think I like that a lot better. And that's it. So the next time we are going to add 3 more buttons. It should go a lot quicker because we've already got our class. We've already got basically everything we need. We take very little change. So next time we're going to add a pause button, a repeat button, and an exit button. So thank you for watching. I again will post a link to this sketch on GitHub, and where you can check it out if you didn't follow along. But I'm so slow, I can't even imagine that you couldn't have followed along. Thank you again for watching. Please be kind to one another and try to be happy. Thank you.